All right, let's just jump right into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unraveling a massive, incredibly complex story. It's literally a $1.9 billion pharmaceutical mystery, and it's one that spans continents, decades, and countless lives. We're looking at a global giant, the medications they pump out, and the absolutely profound impact those pills have once they leave the lab and hit society. So if you've ever wondered how global pain relief markets actually operate behind the scenes, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it.
To really anchor this investigation, we need to look at three very real people. Three distinct individuals living on three completely different continents. You got Brad, he's a father living in Victoria, Australia. Then there's Marco, a 23-year-old student out in Berlin, Germany. And finally, Zico, a moto taxi driver working the streets of Lomé, Togo. So you've got three people living entirely different lives, separated by thousands and thousands of miles, yet their lives were all completely derailed by opioid painkillers.
Which of course begs the question, right? What exactly connects an Australian father, a German student, and a Togolese taxi driver? Like, how do the medical supply chains and corporate decisions made in one specific part of the world ripple all the way outward to impact such wildly different people? This is the massive global scale of the crisis we're digging into today.
Section 1, the invisible thread.
Because that invisible thread, it leads directly back to a single industrial town in Germany. Specifically, it points straight to a family-owned pharmaceutical giant called Grünenthal. They're a $1.9 billion company, and they just happen to be one of the world's absolute biggest painkiller manufacturers. In fact, they're the original developers behind globally recognized opioid painkillers like Tramadol and Tapentadol.
Section 2, a dark corporate history. If we actually trace their past, you'll see a pretty controversial history right out of the gate. Grünenthal was founded in 1946, just after World War II. And during those early years, reports show they hired scientists who had held positions of power within the Nazi Party, including people accused of horrific crimes in concentration camps. Now, for their part, Grünenthal confirms they did employ these researchers, stating that, well, this was common practice in post-war Germany, though they absolutely condemn Nazi crimes today. Then, you jump to 1957. They launched a tranquilizer called Contragon. The active ingredient? Thalidomide. It was prescribed for morning sickness, and tragically, it caused severe birth defects in around 12,000 babies. Decades later, the founding family did publicly apologize for the tragedy and established a foundation for the survivors. After nearly having their entire reputation wiped out by that scandal, they pivoted, launching the opioid Tramadol in 1977, and eventually followed that up decades later with Tapentadol in 2010. Section 3, the opioid illusion.
Okay, to really understand what's happening here, we have to break down exactly what these drugs actually are. We've got to distinguish between an opiate and an opioid. An opiate, like morphine, is natural. It's derived directly from the latex of the opium poppy. An opioid, on the other hand, is a much broader term. It includes fully or even partially synthetic substances that are literally engineered in pharmaceutical labs. Now, both of them work by attaching to opioid receptors in your brain and spinal cord, which blocks pain signals and prompts the release of endorphins.
Let's look at the baseline potency to put this all into perspective. Morphine is our standard here, sitting right at 100%. When Grünenthal first launched Tramadol, they marketed it as a weak opioid. It was sitting at just about 10 to 17% of the potency of morphine. Compare that to something like Purdue Pharma's Oxycontin, which is roughly twice as effective as morphine, or 200%. But here's the catch. As generic versions of Tramadol started flooding the market, Grünenthal pushed its successor, Tapentadol, and they marketed it to a lot of people as a stronger yet supposedly cleaner and less addictive alternative to drugs like oxycodone.
But despite how they're framed by marketing, these synthetic solutions carry massive, documented risks. Just look at the staggering data from England and Wales. Opiates were involved in nearly half, 47% of all drug poisoning deaths. These things are dangerous because users inevitably build a tolerance. That means they need higher and higher doses, which can ultimately
devastating, particularly in developing markets. Down in Latin America, Tapendal prescriptions have totally surged. They've actually overtaken generic oxycodone in countries like Mexico and Peru, right on the heels of heavily funded lobbying by pain associations. Meanwhile, over in West Africa, countries like Togo and Cameroon are dealing with a rampant tramadol abuse crisis. Now, it's super important to point out here that Grunethal doesn't directly distribute tramadol to West Africa. Instead, that market is completely flooded with cheap generics trafficked in from China and India. But critics argue that Grunethal's initial framing of the drug as low risk sort of laid the groundwork. It helped create this massive, poorly regulated global demand in the first place.
And honestly, here is a truly mind-blowing detail about just how pervasive this has become. A few years ago, scientists actually thought they had discovered tramadol occurring naturally in the roots of a plant known as the African peach in Cameroon. It literally made global headlines. People were amazed that a synthetic drug was found in nature. But just a year later, the whole myth was completely debunked. The tramadol wasn't natural at all. It was actually man-made, synthetic tramadol that had so heavily polluted the local environment that it was literally contaminating the groundwater and being absorbed by the plants. Crazy, right?
Finally, Section 6, the cost of pain.
We really have to contextualize all of this within the absolutely massive $1.7 trillion global pharmaceutical market. This is an industry that's constantly growing, especially as our global populations age. So you can see how the financial incentives to discover and distribute effective pain management are just astronomical.
Now, to be completely fair and present Grunethal's stance on all this, they argue that their marketing materials were based exclusively on peer-reviewed medical data. They stand by the fact that opioids are essential for severe conditions, things like cancer treatment, and they maintain that they should always be a doctor's last resort. On top of that, they point out that they are halting new opioid research and development entirely, and that they explicitly rely on and support national governments to enforce proper, strict local regulations. But there's this quote from investigative journalist Maria Christoph that I think perfectly summarizes the core tension here. She says, "A world without pain is something that is quite misleading because a world without pain doesn't exist. And especially an opioid is not changing this world where pain actually exists." I mean, she hits the nail right on the head. It perfectly highlights the impossible and ultimately dangerous corporate promise of a totally pain-free existence.
Which leaves us with one final thought to consider today. When patients trust their doctors, when entire countries rely on pharmaceutical research, and when vulnerable populations are suddenly flooded with highly addictive generics originally formulated in European labs, where does the responsibility actually end in a trillion-dollar pursuit of a pain-free world? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it helps you understand some of the hidden mechanisms driving our global healthcare system. See you next time.